What if I told you that many of the richest real estate investors in the world rarely pay for a property entirely out of their own pocket? They don't save up the full price. They don't rush to pay off the loan. A lot of them deliberately keep that debt sitting there for years, sometimes decades, on purpose. Sounds backwards, right? Here's where it gets uncomfortable. In 2008, while millions of ordinary families were losing their homes, some of the largest investors in the world were doing the opposite. Large institutional buyers and more than a few billionaires started buying up properties in bulk, sometimes thousands at a time. Same crash, same country, same houses. One group lost everything. The other group used the crisis to get richer than ever. That's not luck. That's not timing. That's a completely different set of rules most of us were never taught. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you why the wealthy treat debt like a tool instead of a threat. Why the size of your bank account matters less to a lender than you'd think. And the real strategy behind how big investors buy buildings using other people's money, other people's rent, and legal tax strategies most people don't even know exist. Stick around, because near the end there's a fact about how banks actually decide who gets approved for financing, and it will change how you think about debt completely. Here's what most of us were taught about money and houses. Work hard. Save a down payment. Take out a mortgage. Spend the next 25 or 30 years paying it back. Once it's paid off, congratulations. You finally own something. And to be fair, that's not a bad plan. A home can absolutely build wealth over time. It can give you stability, protect you from rising rent, and slowly build equity in the background. But here's the question almost nobody asks. While that equity is quietly building, is the house also putting money in your pocket every month? For most people, the honest answer is no. It costs you insurance, repairs, taxes, and interest long before it ever gives anything back. Now picture how a billionaire looks at that same brick and concrete. They're not just waiting for value to slowly climb over 3 decades. They're building something that pays them almost immediately. Same materials. 2 completely different relationships with money. Let's break this down with a simple story. Imagine 2 people, Sarah and David, each with $50,000 saved. Sarah buys a house to live in. She uses her $50,000 as a down payment, borrows the rest from the bank, and moves in. Every month, her salary pays the mortgage. The house doesn't generate a cent of income. It just sits there, hopefully increasing in value if the market cooperates. David does something different. He uses his $50,000 as a down payment on a small apartment building that already has tenants. He also borrows the rest from the bank. But here's the twist. The rent his tenants pay covers the mortgage, the taxes, the repairs, and still leaves him a little extra every month. Same amount of personal cash, same use of a bank loan. But Sarah is feeding the asset. David is being fed by the asset. Now imagine David a few years down the road. 5 different families are paying rent every month, slowly paying down his loan and quietly building his net worth while he's asleep at work or on vacation. That's not a fantasy. That's just what happens when an asset is designed to produce income instead of consume it. This shift from buying something that costs you money to buying something that produces money is the first real difference in how wealthy investors approach real estate. And here's the strange part nobody tells you. David only put in $50,000, yet he controls a building worth $300,000 or more. That gap between what he personally owns and what he controls is called leverage. It simply means using borrowed money to control something bigger than your own cash could buy alone. Most people were taught that debt is dangerous, something you take on only when you're desperate. But here's the reveal. The bank doesn't actually care whether David is rich. It cares whether the property itself can generate enough income to cover the loan. In other words, the property proves itself. That's a completely different mindset than, can I personally afford this? But here's where it gets even stranger. Many investors don't just borrow to buy buildings. They later use those same buildings to unlock even more money without ever selling a single property, and often while legally reducing what they owe in taxes. Let me show you exactly how that works, because once you see this, you'll never look at a for sale sign the same way again. Imagine David's apartment building rises in value over the years, from $300,000 to $500,000. The obvious move would be to sell it and pocket the profit. But selling usually triggers taxes on that gain right away. It also means losing the monthly rent forever. So, instead, many experienced investors do something else. David goes back to the bank and says, "This building is now worth more, so lend me money against that increased value." The bank agrees because the building itself is the guarantee. David walks away with cash in hand. And here's the part that surprises people. The cash generally isn't taxed the way a paycheck is, because you're only taxed on money you earn, not on money you borrow. Exactly how much tax benefit applies depends on the country and how the investment is structured, but the core idea holds up almost everywhere. A loan is not income. David still owns the building. He still collects the rent. And now he also has cash to buy his next property. Buy an income-producing asset. Borrow against it as it grows. Use that money to buy the next one. Repeat. This is sometimes called buy, borrow, and hold, and it's close to the most efficient wealth-building loop that legally exists. Compare that to the cycle most of us were taught. Earn money. Get taxed on it immediately. Spend what's left. Save whatever small amount remains. Same financial system. Completely different rulebook, because most of us were only ever handed the first one. This is exactly the kind of opportunity that led large institutional investors to significantly expand their real estate holdings after prices fell during the 2008 financial crisis, buying income-producing properties while financing was cheap. Now you might be thinking, this sounds great with hundreds of millions of dollars, but does this actually apply to a regular person with a normal income? Here's the surprising answer. This same basic strategy is legally available to a lot of regular people with stable income and decent credit. The tools aren't secret. What's secret is that nobody teaches this in school, so most people never even know the option is sitting right in front of them. So if this is available to regular people too, why doesn't everyone do it? The answer isn't a lack of money. It's a lifetime of conditioning. Most of us grew up seeing debt in only one form, the kind that made people poorer, a relative drowning in credit card bills, a neighbor losing a home in a recession. So, the moment the word loan comes up, the brain quietly screams danger, even when the loan being discussed works completely differently from the one that hurts someone we know. But there's a real difference between bad debt and productive debt, and almost nobody breaks it down clearly. Bad debt is money borrowed to buy something that loses value and produces nothing, a new car, an unnecessary credit card balance. That kind of debt drains you every month. Productive debt is money borrowed to buy something that produces more income than the loan costs, like David's building. That debt effectively pays for itself and then some. Experienced investors aren't reckless with debt. They're selective. They avoid bad debt, and they use productive debt as a building block. Most people, without knowing the difference, avoid both, and in doing so, they avoid the one tool that could have quietly built their wealth in the background for years. Here's something that makes this even more powerful, and it's usually where the story stops in most explainer videos, right when it's actually getting interesting. David isn't just making money one way. At the same time, his property can be gaining value in the market. His tenants are paying down his loan balance every month. He may be collecting monthly rental income above his expenses. And depending on where he lives and how the property is owned, he may also get certain tax advantages along the way. 4 potential benefits, stacking quietly on top of each other from one single decision. That's the part that compounds faster than most people expect, and it's the real reason. Patient real estate investors often end up wealthier than people chasing quick wins elsewhere. And here's the part that might sting a little. The home a lot of people proudly pay off over 30 years, the one they call their biggest investment, usually isn't doing any of those 4 things at once. It's not producing monthly cash flow. Nobody else is paying down the loan for you. It's simply sitting there, hoping the market goes up someday. That doesn't make owning a home a mistake. It just means calling it an investment when it behaves more like a long-term expense, is where a lot of the confusion begins. So what does this actually mean for you? It's not about rushing out tomorrow to buy an apartment building. It's about shifting one question you ask yourself before spending or borrowing money. Instead of asking, can I afford the payments on this? Start asking, will this asset pay me, or will I be the one paying it forever? If you're buying a home to live in, that's a lifestyle decision, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just don't confuse it with an income-producing investment. If you want to build wealth the way patient, experienced investors do, look for things that generate income first and appreciate in value second. A small rental property, a share in a real estate fund, even a modest investment that produces monthly cash flow all follow the same underlying principle. And here's the one fact worth remembering. Banks generally care less about how much money you personally have and more about whether the asset itself can support the loan. That single shift in thinking, from can I afford this to can this pay for itself, is the real starting point. One honest note before you go further. Real estate investing, like any investing, carries real risk. Property values can fall, interest rates change, and financing that works well in one market or country may not work the same way in another. This isn't a guaranteed formula, it's a different way of thinking about assets and debt. Remember the question from the beginning? Why did one family lose their home in 2008 while other investors used that same crisis to buy thousands of properties? It wasn't because one group had a crystal ball. It was because they understood how to use assets, debt, and cash flow differently than everyone else. The buildings were the same, the banks were the same. The rules of the game were the same for anyone willing to learn them. The mindset was the only thing that was different. Most people spend their lives working to pay off things that quietly take money from them, believing it's the responsible path. Patient investors spend their lives collecting things that pay them, using tools most people were simply never taught to use. Same system, same buildings, completely different game. The real question now is, which game have you been playing without even realizing it?